All right. Do you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Morning still? Yes, 11:30. Yeah. Waiting for lunch? Yes, I'm hungry. All right. So my name is Ravikanth. This is a session on partial configurations and cross-machine synchronization or cross-node synchronization, whichever you want to call it. How many of you have heard about these two features in WMF5? Yeah, that guy developed it there. Yes. All right. So how many of you used it? At least the partial configurations? Used in production? No? Cross-machine sync? No hands. That shows something. Okay, we'll see a few more things about it. All right. So something about me. I'm a principal engineer at Dell. I work on virtualization and hybrid cloud solutions, mostly Microsoft, VMware, and things like that, Azure stuff. I'm a Windows PowerShell MVP. I'm also founder and editor of PowerShell magazine. It's been a while since we went quiet. We'll be back soon, right? And I'm also author of PowerShell Desired State Configuration Revealed, which is a published book by Apress. Right now, working on a second edition for that. It's going to be a big, huge thing. I mean, the first one was like 350 pages. This will be like 600, 700 pages. So just wait for it. A bunch of other things that I did, and a few more books coming soon because I started expanding into Azure and other places as well, other technologies as well. So there is a few stuff that's I'm gonna write there as well. All right. So for the agenda today, I have just two things: partial configurations. I'm gonna talk about what partial configurations are, how do you use them, and are they really right for you? Right? I mean, not everything is right for us all the time. So let's see why they're right and why they're not right, given the context. Cross-node synchronization, I have a pretty simple, stupid demo there, but that should give you the idea about what it is. There are gotchas there also. We'll see all that. Most of the time I want to spend on the demos, but any questions you have, just shoot it. I mean, you don't have to wait until the Q&A also while it's there. That's fine. So to start with, how many of you are infrastructure administrators here? How many of you work in teams? Okay. So how many of you have a server or an infrastructure where more than one administrator is involved in configuring it? Okay. So what are the pain points? One, yes. Any other thing? Communication. You can't fix it through tools. I mean, I'm sorry about that. Right. So one of the things that we have seen at customer sites is when we are configuring some of the converged infrastructures also, there is still a separation of duties in the enterprises, right? IT organizations, you have a person doing network configuration, a person doing storage configuration. There's one person who's just doing Hyper-V configuration or VMware configuration on top of the node. Now, there are different, if you actually look at it in the perspective of DSC resource or a DSC configuration document, there are different fragments that these people are responsible for creating and managing, especially, right? Now, with WMF 4.0, if you remember that, we just had a single document. You could just write a single configuration script. You put everything into that. And now any modification that you want to do for any resource within that configuration, you have to update the entire document. I mean, you basically update the particular resource and the entire document gets updated. Whether you put it in a version controller, it doesn't matter, but everything gets updated all the time. With WMF 5.0, the new feature called partial configurations basically enables that separation of duties or delegation of responsibilities. Now, if you have something like a scenario like this, very trivial thing, you have a database server, but when you're configuring the database server, you have an operating system administrator who's doing the initial operating system deployment and the remaining configuration, like let's say enabling remote desktop or changing some setting in terms of IE security, etc. There are database administrators who come in and install database on that, SQL database or whatever it is. And there might be a security administrator who's basically coming and creating the hardening rules on top of it, like enabling file word settings and hardening your SQL services, etc. Now, this kind of a scenario can be enabled with PowerShell configurations today, right? Now, you can tell DSC that I have my OS administrator who will give you the fragment that configures the operating system settings. And you can say, I have a database administrator, and this is the database configuration fragment that I will use. And I'll have a security configuration fragment. And what LCM does on the remote system is combining all of them together and then enacting the configuration on the target node. Okay? Now, these three are independent of each other. I mean, from a look of it at least. But I don't want to install my database server until my OS configuration is complete and all the, let's say, all the settings that are required within the operating system for the database to work are configured or not, right? I don't want to apply the database configuration until then. So you can actually create dependencies between these PowerShell configurations now. Okay, so yeah.
So what about if one configuration overrides settings from printing?
Okay. Okay, that's a limitation today. So I mean, whoever gets applied the last will get the precedence. From a resource point of view, as long as the resource names are different, it doesn't really find any conflicts. But if the resource names are same, the resource instance names are same in the different PowerShell configuration fragments, at runtime you'll see an error that there is a conflict. But if the same resource is getting modified in two different ways in two different fragments, the last one wins. No?
Yes, so basically each resource has a key, which is supposed to be unique. So if you're saying one part of configuration says user, other also say user, and their usernames are the same, then it's an error.
Okay, so as long as the key matches, if the key is not matching, it'll just go override that stuff.
That's right. Then it's a wrong model.
Yeah.
The resource is wrong.
Resource is wrong, yes.
Yeah, if that happens, then it's wrong.
Yeah.
And there was a bug in WF5 RTM that even if you have the same name in partial configurations, because a resource instance name, what you're using, I don't know what I'm using, you don't know.
Yes.
If they happen to be the same, we wouldn't throw an error, but we have fixed it going forward.
Fix it or fixed it?
We have fixed it moving
Moving
forward.
forward. Okay. Okay, right, thank you. Yeah, yeah. So that's about the delegated configuration management. So now you can have multiple fragments going into a system, each fragment owned by a separate team or an individual, and they can have their own servers, like pool server and so on, pushing or the target node pulling all of that from a different pool server altogether. Now you can also have something like this particular fragment, instead of pulling that, you can actually push it. So a mixed mode configuration is also possible with PowerShell configurations. Now, another scenario could be, I don't know how many of you would really use this. It's an incremental configuration enact, right? Now, my OS team is ready to go deploy the operating system and configure things. I don't have to really wait for my SQL configuration to bring their fragment into the system. Instead, I'll just go apply my configuration, and whenever the SQL team is ready, they'll come and apply their fragment later.
Is there any way to control which team is allowed to use which kind of resources? Because, for
Yes.
example, the OS configuration team joins the domain, the DB team unfortunately de-joins it again, so how can we control that?
We can do that. We can do that. There's a specific setting when you define the PowerShell configs. I'll show you that in the demo. Yeah. So this model is about incremental configuration. I've not seen a pretty big use case for it. But the overall design seems to be based on the delegation of configuration management, not the incremental pieces of it. Right. Let's see the demo here. Azure doesn't give up on me today, right? So let's just see the LCM settings first to understand what we have additional in here, right? What you see here, the PowerShell configurations, this particular meta resource actually defines the PowerShell configuration fragments. It tells LCM, this is what you need to expect before doing a configuration enact, right? Now, there are different properties within that. You can see, look at this class, MSFT _PowerShell configuration in the desired state configuration namespace. And when you run that, you'll see a bunch of sim properties. I've not expanded that there, but you see the properties within that meta resource here, right? Forget about resource ID and source info. Configuration source is where it is coming from. In case of a pull server, you can either mention a repository web or a repository share. Sorry, not repository. It's configuration repository web and share. Yeah, things have changed in WMF5 quite a bit, right? Depends on can be another partial configuration. You can specify my SQL fragment depends on OS fragment. Okay, I'll show you the configuration also. So description is just any random text that you want to put there. Exclusive resources is where we specify what this particular partial fragment can use. If I say the exclusive within the exclusive resources, if I say they can use only XAD computer, they can only use XAD computer, nothing else. I can give a fully qualified name, or I can say if the module is XAD domain / asterisk, it will allow all the resources within that module. If I say XAD domain / XAD computer, they can only use only that resource within the configuration.
Essentially, it's more about only that configuration can use it, no other configuration.
That's correct, yeah. Refresh mode can be pull, push, or disabled. Disabled is basically something that you use when you want to, when you're using other third-party tools like Chef or others who are directly calling the API. You can push partial configurations, you can pull all of them, or you can mix both of them, both the modes for different partial configurations. Resource module source, it can be a SMB share as well as it can be a pull server if you want to use that, but it has to be defined within the LCM configuration again, right? So let's quickly see first one thing here. I have a pull mode, it's already open, I think. Yeah, this is the one, okay. So this is the meta config I have. So what I'm defining here, these are the LCM settings. I have a configuration ID defined here, which is just a random GUID that I created to identify a specific node. And I have refresh mode set to pull. These are the general values. And I have reboot node if needed is set to true. The interesting part here is the partial configuration definitions, right? This is the first partial config I have. I have a description given to it. I have a configuration source defined there. This I'm pulling from the pull server defined over here. So a pull server URL is given through a command line, and I've set the refresh mode to pull. Now the second thing I have here is another dependent service on the first partial fragment, and I've defined the depends on here. Right. So when I enact this configuration on the LCM, it will actually look for the pull server, look for the partial configuration name dot configuration ID dot mof or dot checksum dot mof or mof dot checksum. When it finds the files, it will actually wait for the dependent fragment to come first. It will then take the second fragment, then combine both of them into a single mof, enact that. We'll see the process now. So let me just create the config first. So I'm targeting this towards VM5, and this is my pull server. I have running it on Azure, and I just want to give a different output path. Let's do this. Now, if you see my pull server, I've already have these configurations published in my configuration repo here. So that'll be program files. I just chose this location. It can be anything else, right? When I configured the pull server, I chose a configuration repository location for this at this location. Otherwise, it can be anything. Now you can see my mof files created this manner. I have the test dependent service dot the configuration ID dot mof, and then I have the same thing with mof.checksum, because whenever you're pulling configuration from a pull server, DSC pull server, it requires a checksum to ensure that the configuration on the node is same as or different from the pull server configuration, right? So let's try to enact this. Since this is configured in pull, at some point in time, my LCM, after it is configured, now we are configuring the LCM right now. So that's done. At some point in time, when the refresh mode frequency kicks in, the LCM will go fetch the pull configurations from the pull server and enact it. But for impatient souls like us, I mean, we can just do a update DSC configuration. So, did it do something? Yeah. Get DSC configuration. You have the resources in. Yeah, it's running state here, and you have the other one also running. This gets stopped immediately. Audio service. Okay, that's a wrong example on a Windows Server 2016. So, right. So the basic idea is this, right? You have different partial configuration fragments, and you configure them with dependencies. And the LCM actually waits for all the fragments to come in and then combines them. You can see on the target node. This is where I've applied all that. If you go to C: Windows System 32 configuration, and then you see the partial configurations. This is called the partial configuration store. All the fragments are initially stored there, and then once all of them arrive, it will be combined into appending.mof. Once it is enacted, enact is complete, it becomes current.mof. Right. So that's how it works.
So this is done on the client?
This is done on the target node. So that's the reason. If you have any errors or conflicts within the configuration documents, you will only find them during runtime. Right. So that's one of the drawbacks of partial configurations. All right, so let me quickly show you a push mode demo also here. So in this, it's the same configuration document, except that the refresh mode is set to push. Now the way you use this is when you are actually pushing a partial configuration, I'm gonna run only the config, set the LCM. The LCM is set to receive them in the push mode, the whatever fragments that we have. Now you need to publish that configuration to the target node, right? So what really happens when you publish is basically it takes all the fragments that are there within that folder I specified, and it sends them to the target node, and the target node combines that and makes it appending.mof. They are published. Sorry, they're published, right? Now you have the MOFs here. Now what I'll do is start DSC configuration using existing config on the system. Oh, it did not combine any of that because we sent only one document, right? So if you see, I sent only one document to the target node. I've not sent the second one. So let's try to enact the configuration. It should actually, unless my service is already in desired state. Yeah, the other service is already in desired state, so it goes ahead and does the job here. But if the second fragment is not there on the remote system, it will actually throw an error there. We can try and see that. Let's do something. Because the fragment is already there, it is just going and doing the job there. Instead, let's do one thing. Let's clean up this whole thing. Current.mof. And don't do these on a production system. You'll lose everything that you configured. I mean, You won't be able to track. You can push it again, but you won't be able to track anything unless you push it again and do things. For a demo, it's okay. So let's do this. I'll publish this config. This particular configuration has a dependency on the first service fragment that I sent, right? But I have not sent that fragment yet. If you go to the partial configuration store here, you will not see that second fragment. There's only one. Now, if I go enact this configuration without the dependency being there on the system target node, it should throw an error. Yeah. You see that? Service depends on the partial configuration will not be set until it finds the configuration that it depends on, right? Now what we do here is we'll send the other configuration using publish DSC config. So once that is sent, you'll see both of them in the store. And you don't have the pending morph yet. And that gets created once I do the enact process using start DSC config. So that's where I'm using the -use existing with the start DSC configuration, because I already published the configuration to the target node. I'm saying start DSC configuration -use existing. So it basically looks at the configuration stores or the pending.morph if it is already there on the system, it then starts the enact process. So now it's complete, right? So that's how you do it in push. Any questions so far? Or am I going too fast? No? Okay. We all good? You can also do mixed mode. Like I said, you can either pull all of them or push all of them, or you can pull some fragments and push some other fragments, right? Now, the simple way configuring, again, the refresh mode has to be changed, nothing more than that. So I have the dependent resource going as push, and the first resource, this test survey, is going as a pull-based fragment, right? The target node will be pulling the first fragment. The second one will be pushed to the target node. Now, the way you do it is once you build this up, again, same thing. You don't have to change any knowledge that or update anything that you already have. What happened?
Is there any way you can prevent push completely, so you can not accept push?
So that depends on who. No, you cannot. So the question is, can you prevent push completely?
Yes, if you set it as pull.
No, I'm just thinking about, for example, people bypassing your release pipeline and things like that by just pushing fragments that aren't going to the authorized.
In your meta configuration, you have a settings block. There, if you set pull, then the default is pull.
No, but you can still
The
push.
default is pull, but I
You can still
override
push.
that if I push through my config.
No, you cannot. If it's in pull, then it will say you have to use dash force. And once you do dash force, then it's out of pull, it becomes push.
Then yeah.
No.
Move your local permission to local admin. Yeah, no, I was just asking, right? Yeah.
No.
People do stupid things.
So Hemant, what I have here is a similar config, right? So I have the settings LCM set to pull mode, but I'm still pushing the config.
Because you can override, and any admin can go and change the meta configuration. So
Yeah.
It's all about having your system permissions, not people. Yeah.
It's demos. So I've set the LCM to a mixed mode refresh for the partial configurations. Simple thing. Whatever is in push mode, you just publish it first. So it goes into the partial configuration store. And then for the pull mode fragments, you just do update DSC or wait for the consistency check to happen. It will go pull the remaining fragments from the pull server, combine everything, and start enact process. Right. So we'll not wait for it to do it. We'll just do it. It's not found. Seriously? Go on.
your checksum hasn't changed.
Delete your checksum file. That's exactly the issue I had. If you update it instead of
That's why you should
writing
not do
this
it
time.
by hand.
No. This is a completely different node. So I'm targeting towards a different node. Look at this, VM3. I did that in VM2. So this is a completely new VM that I have, right? Yes. So let's see. Yeah.
You have checksum or LCM thinks you have a checksum.
Now what I have here, okay, this is VM3.
Do you need to do use existing?
Oh, I have test service. Test service is getting pulled. Okay. Okay, let's do one more checksum. Big deal. I need to update. So this is the service morph. I have test service.morph is what I want to update. Okay, that's done. Let's try one more time.
If the content has not changed, the checksum will not change.
Then how would you update it?
Either you make changes to your configuration, that's when
Change it again?
it change, or delete the checksum file that is in the that target on the target node.
Target node. Yeah, that's a good idea actually. Let's see.
Put a white line, yeah. Put a space, that will change.
Let's try this one more time. Yeah. I don't know why this is kind of. Who made the decision of putting it in System32? I mean, it's too long path.
Who decided to call it System32?
Is this trivia? What's the prize?
Come work for Microsoft.
There's no checksum. There's no checksum on the target node, by the way. Yeah.
Try again.
So.
Your update is happening on 1 and not 3. Command in the end.
Oh, no, this is the wrong config. I'm updating this actually, mixed mode. The LCM set, let's do this. This is already present on the system, so we should be good. Let's save to the partial config store. VM3, I'm just doing a pull again. And then it says registration failed. Wow.
Full server is not available. Or registration failed.
Oh, come on, this is the pull server I'm sitting on. I mean. All right, so you get the point, right? So let's not worry about this. This should work. It worked in my, when I rehearsed the session and created all demos. So it will work. It will work.
So the point is, in real life, things fail and don't panic.
Yes. Like this demo, yes. All right. Yeah. So the other one that I talked about, someone asked a question about exclusive resources, right? So the way we do that is, you mention everything here. Where is the exclusive resources? So I'm letting that configuration, only this partial fragment use the service resource, okay? Now, but this service resource also, this is also a service resource, okay? Now, when I enact this configuration, see what happens. Okay, this is what you see there. Clearly, what? ISC, sorry, yeah, next time.
David's going to fix it.
Yes. Okay, you see that there. It basically tells you the partial configuration test dependent service cannot use whatever service resource which is exclusively reserved by another partial configuration, right? So that is how you limit who can use what kind of resources. Now,
But the first partial configuration to put a lock on that would.
so at the compile time, I think. So Hemant, what really happens when I specify the exclusive resource? Does it do the checks at the compile time or?
Yes, the checks happen at the compile time because the merge time, once the second partial configuration reaches the box, we take those things from the partial store, merge to create a pending .mark. That's when you check like, oh, I said on the I can use it, whether you can use it or not. We don't do it at the publish time. Publish is an action of just putting it there. The validation phase, which happens under the cover, is when all this.
Okay.
But are there plans to kind of maybe make it at the build time or publish time? I mean, both including the resource conflicts and this?
You wouldn't be able to see it though if it was on another system.
If somebody else is generating it, you've got no visibility.
No, I think what Ravi's point is when I publish when you're publishing yours,
Oh, well,
do the
Yeah.
validation and tell you your publish is going to your configuration is going
It's going to fail. Yeah.
That's a good one and put it on.
User voice?
and
Yes.
make it.
Yeah.
We have talked about exposing that validation phase and whether it's a separate command layer or it's partial publish dash validate kind of a thing.
Exactly.
We can do it.
Yeah. Cool. You have 2 of them coming towards you after this session. So. All right. So if you see this, for the first config I showed you, I used a configuration ID, right? This is the so old way of doing things. Now with V2 pull server, you have something called registration keys. So you can have a registration, the target node registers with the pull server, and you can specify configuration names as a meta property, and the target node basically looks for those configuration names or the mobs with those configuration names on the pull server. The way you do that is, I've already done that here actually, I did not talk about it. So I specify the config names, like an array here, test service and test dependent service, and notice that I don't have a configuration ID. So there was a bug before RTM, I think, which prevented partial configurations in the registration mode. It always required a configuration ID, but that's fixed. I was surprised. I mean, I was just trying it for the demos, and I saw it's working. I mean, it was a pleasant one, right? So you just specify the configuration names like this, test service and test dependent service, and those mobs should exist on the pull server config repository. So the way I have it here is this, test service.mof and the checksum for it, and the test dependent service.mof and the checksum for it. So this is another way of, you can call it like a reuse also. Now any number of nodes with the same configuration names can actually pull the same mof. So earlier we had the issue of when you have a configuration ID prefix or within the configuration name, it was always unique. You had to make multiple copies of the same configuration if you want to share any config with target nodes. Whereas in this registration method, you can just name it configuration name.mof, and all the nodes that have that in the LCM settings will automatically pull it from that. So you don't have to copy, make multiple copies of the same config mof, on the pull server anymore. So
Can you mix and match? So the config names and configuration ID. So I'm just
no.
from
No.
a migration perspective.
No, so what happens is the moment it finds the configuration ID, it completely ignores V2. It just goes and tries to find if there is a...
Yeah, no, sorry, on the pull server end is where I'm going. So will a pull server support nodes using
I have.
IDs?
I have both combined here.
So pull server doesn't know about this. From a pull server perspective, it's just a mock file, whatever the name is. It's the pull client which is sending the request with the right name.
Yep.
Okay.
The pull server can have both.
Yeah.
And a WF5 pull server can act as a V1 or a V2.
So this is kind of a recommended. I mean, I would recommend. I don't know if Microsoft's recommendation is also about registration keys, but this is an easier method of managing your configurations than the older configuration ID method, right?
That's why we did it.
Yeah. Sounds good.
I thought we all loved GUIs.
Yeah. So, well, that's about the partial configurations that I wanted to show. Any questions there?
How many people head hurts when they see partial configuration? Like, yeah, this is all. We should not never do it. Or how many people like, wow, this is what I was waiting for?
Oh. So, are the partial configs right for you, right? Now, the first thing is you should understand the enact process. Like we talked about the conflicts that might arise and some of the publish level times, exclusive resources, etc. We don't know until the compilation starts if there is an error within the configuration. So that's one of the things that you should be aware of. And also, if you are actually putting any dependent resource fragments or the configuration fragments, you should know all of those dependencies upfront, right? Or you keep changing your meta configuration, which is okay with some organizations, which probably is not okay in some other organizations, right? So the incremental fragment enact, that's what I was talking about, right? If you don't know your fragments upfront, you can use the incremental manner, but you keep updating your LCM also all the time, along with your configurations. Now, the third point, individual fragment updates may impact operations, right? Now, think about something like this. You have this kind of a scenario. They're independent fragments. Imagine that. Now, the security thing does not necessarily depend, or the DB does not necessarily depend on security. You've not defined dependencies, for example. Within the security team, suddenly they find some more new policies that they can apply, and they just push all that to your target node. You're not even aware of what the security policy is right now, at the current state of it, and what has changed within that. You don't know how it is negatively impacting your DB access or your operating system itself, right? So this is where the problem is. So now if you have a single configuration document, you're actually saying that I'm going to build this in one place, I'm going to enact that as a single configuration document. Now you're giving access to different people who can individually push configuration to your node, and it may break your application which is running on the target node. Some of those things, that's where the operations validation we talked about yesterday actually will help you. But it has to be a proper continuous integration process where you push all the partial configuration documents. Anytime a fragment changes, you kickstart your operations validation suite. So that's how it has to be done. If you have those operations tests in place for your infrastructure, you don't have to really worry about any of the other things, right? Partial configurations are right for you in that case. Once again, it should enable collaboration, not separation of duties, right? Although there are individual teams and individual team members handling configuration fragments, it should ideally start enabling more collaboration. You should be collaborating with others within the infrastructure management teams, and then doing this as a single team, but not like the other example I basically talked about. Your security team just pushes everything that they want. It should not be that way. Locking resource modules, we talked about exclusive resources, isn't always good, right? Steven Muraski did a post, although I don't completely agree with everything in that, but there's one certain point that he mentioned within that where he talks about a specific example of a SQL database team, right? You have a web web administration module. Let's say your web team is actually going and using that resource module, and you have a SQL database team deploying your SQL databases using the X SQL resource or whatever it is. Now, at some point in time, they'll start working on reporting services. Now, that could be a part of your X web administration module. Now, if I'm locking modules, saying that my SQL team cannot use any of the X web administration, or they are exclusively reserved, for the web administration team, there are no ways the SQL team can actually go deploy reporting services on that system, right? So such things can happen. So it's not always very good to put that reserved resources or exclusive resources within your fragments. All right, so that's about the partial configs. Any other questions we have here? No? Okay. Let's move on. The second one is cross-node synchronization. Now, I mean, we don't deploy infrastructure in silos anymore, right? I mean, this is my server, you don't touch it. And this is your server, I don't touch it. We kind of have infrastructure where everything works together. I have my Hyper-V cluster servers talking to my storage scale-out file server nodes. And for me, it's a single solution entity. For me, it's a single infrastructure that I want to manage. Yeah?
A single fabric.
Yeah, a single fabric, yes. Now, within that context, you also have dependencies between different layers or tiers of your infrastructure. My web tier depends on my SQL tier, or my web tier depends on the middleware logic, and my Hyper-V cluster depends on my storage file server, and so on. Now, when you're deploying all of these, this kind of a configuration that has dependencies within it, using DSC, in version 4, or PowerShell version 4, there was no way you could do a cross-node synchronization. We could not say really, I mean, we could implement that using some mechanism, but there was no built-in mechanism to do that, right? I couldn't say, don't install my web application until the database is ready, or the database cluster is ready, only then go do my web application configuration. That was not possible, right? Given that those two are two different entities, two different target nodes from a configuration management point of view. With cross-node synchronization on WMF5, that is possible now. There are 3 resources that are there in box: wait for any, wait for some, and wait for all. You can see that. So not a huge difference actually between these resources. Underlying logic is almost same, the way they work. You see here, this is a wait for any resource. So what happens when you use this is you can specify an array of nodes that you want to wait for a specific resource to come into desired state, and that you can specify the resource identifier here. And you can specify the retry count and retry interval. Since this is wait for any resource, even if one of the nodes gets that resource into desired state, the dependent configuration will continue to go on. Okay? Wait for some. Once again, you have node count, which is an additional property here. You specify the node name as an array here again, how many ever number of nodes that you want to wait for a specific resource to come into desired state, and you can specify what is that node count. If you have 10 of those nodes there, you can say that just wait for any of the 2 nodes to come into desired state and continue the configuration on the target remote node that you have. The last one is wait for all. Whatever you specify as the node name value there, if you have 10 nodes, the config will actually wait for all of them to come into desired state and then proceed further. Okay. Now, the wait for some and wait for any, it's basically like if you want to wait for a single node, just use for wait for any. If you want to wait for more than one, or not all of them, then you can go for wait for someone, specify the node count there. Typical examples of this could be you're deploying a failover cluster, right? You might have multiple nodes within that cluster participating. You can just wait for a single cluster, a single node to become a member of the cluster or create the cluster, and then proceed with the remaining infrastructure configuration from the target node. Typical use cases are like that. I mean, otherwise you can actually create. You're doing, let's say, all the OS configuration at the same time, and then you want to wait for your MySQL setup to complete before you start doing any PHP or web application deployment on the web server. You can actually specify wait for this particular node to complete MySQL installation, and then come and do the web administration, web application deployment here. Okay. I have a simple demo here. Let's see. But before that, the way it is implemented is you have something called DSC proxy class. This is not the same as what Ben talked about. Okay, that's a lot of jargons that we use. Microsoft underscore DSC proxy is a new class which in the desired state configuration proxy, it's another namespace that they created. There's a specific method called get resource state. Okay, this gets the state of the resource on the remote system. Now, the wait for all or wait for any of these resources, wait for any, some, and all, they use this particular method internally to query for the remote resource state, and only when it is returns true, they kind of go ahead and do the remaining work. If it doesn't return true within a specified amount of time, the number of retry intervals, it'll just give up and then error out the configuration on the target node. Okay. One thing to notice here is, I've set the authentication to none here. Okay. So this thing does not really require any authentication to go talk to the remote node. It's anonymous call, right? It's very similar to the way test WSMan works. Test WSMan, you don't specify credentials anywhere, right? You just target it towards a node. It actually gets you the WSMan status on that. You had something? Test WSMan, I thought you had a question, sir. You can specify credentials, but it's not always necessary. It can actually work in an anonymous channel. So
you can access it as anonymous, but you will not get information about the
operating system. Yeah, exactly. So over here, a similar approach is used. In fact, the same channel is used, and they've extended it so that they can actually go query for the resource state within on the target node. Okay. Now, since this can be used for kind of a DOS attack, if you call it, right? So there's a limit on how many calls you can make using this. I think that's around 1 per 0.1 second or something like that. 10 in a second. 10 calls in a second. You cannot make more calls than that. There's a throttling limit on that particular resource, right? Okay, so we can actually see they should return. That's all. It basically returns the state of the resource on the target node. But observe, okay, let me show you this. So this is one of the user voice things I've just created. I'll send the link, tweet the link after this session. You can just go vote it up. I'll tell you why. Right. Now let me do one thing. I'll just stop the service. Let's say, if I use push the configuration using DSC again, it'll do a consistency check also, right? And it'll update the cache. Okay. So let's go do this. I'll stop the service here. I'm on the specific node. I'm doing a stop service -name. Not required actually, audio service. Now let's see, get service. It stopped. I'll go back to my WMI call. I'll just run this. Ideally, that state should be false, right?
I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Presumably that's coming from the results of the last consistency.
Yeah.
That's correct. That's correct. So what this method does is it doesn't really go run test DSC configuration.
Invoke the test target
Yeah,
resource.
it doesn't do a consistency check. It just picks it up from the updated cache and gives you the result. Now what will happen in this case is, if I'm running a configuration that depends on this, it'll think that the resource is already in desired state because the consistency check did not happen and the resource state is not updated in the cache. It'll just go try to continue the configuration, but eventually it will fail if there are real dependencies between two different configurations.
Yeah, but I mean, from a day-to-day kind of use perspective, I see this being used obviously during the provisioning process, typically.
Yeah.
So you want to wait for the active directory to come up.
That's right.
That sort of stuff before joining the main.
Yeah.
It's not, I see it more of a deployment thing, not necessarily a day-to-day kind of.
No, not necessarily. I mean, not necessarily, because if I have a failover cluster, right, at some point in time, let's say it went non-functional for some reason. I don't know why, right? And the consistency check did not run, and the last consistency check tells me that it's set to true. Now my web application is trying to access the endpoints during the configuration, and it doesn't find the endpoint because it's not in a desired state. It's non-functional right now. So I have to wait until the configuration frequency kicks in again. Only then the consistency check happens and the resource state gets updated. So until then, whatever configuration that I'm depending on this endpoint will fail.
Yeah. No, I can see your point. If your cluster's gone down, you probably know about it already.
Not necessarily, I mean, not necessarily. Depends on my team, I mean. Are they really looking into it? So, yeah. So this is how you kind of write the cross-node sync configurations. I basically specify wait for all. I just give it some name, and I can specify a number of nodes here within the node name. In this specific case, it will wait for all of them to be in desired state. And I've specified the resource name here, service test audio service. Okay. If I just run this, I think it should run because consistency check might not have kicked in on the other one. Oh, it's actually not. Yeah, it has run. Now what I can do is, I think I'm not set it to autocorrect, so it won't start the service. But let's do a consistency check again, but hopefully that did not. Yeah. So while I was doing that, the system was checking for that. And when I started the service and ran a consistency check again, the test method, actually get resource state method, returned true. And this is where it says the service is ready and just follows on with the remaining configuration that is required. Okay?
So if you run the test DSC configuration, does it update the cache?
That's correct. It does a consistency check, basically. It runs the test method of all your resources that you have. So that's all I have, I think. Any questions that you have? Yes.
Do you use this yourself in production with customers?
I've not used CNS, I mean, not in the same form, but we did a lot of that work for CPS standard. CPS standard uses a lot of this because there's too many nodes getting deployed at the same time. And we need to know the state of each node before we proceed on to the configuration of other nodes. Right. If any of you have bought CPS standard or willing to buy one, there's a lot of examples of that in that. Yeah, buy it for Dell, man, come on. All right, to summarize the whole discussion, partial configurations are great when they're used wisely. So, like the build processes that I talked about or the operations validation that I talked about, they're most important when you're actually using the partial configuration fragments. So that kind of creates also a collaboration environment, I mean, in terms of communication and so on, that has to be established. Kind of a proper IT ops process if you want to really do that in the production, right? Cross-node synchronization is good. We really want to see more examples there. I have a few examples probably I can put together and publish at a later point in time, but they're definitely great for building complex multi-tier applications or the deployment configurations for that. Right. All right, give you back some time and take a break. Any other questions? Thank you.